Ethan often wondered how his life had shifted so dramatically in only a few short years. His father had left when he was a boy, drifting into another family and another world. His mother, Claire, had raised him with unwavering devotion, though she carried the quiet exhaustion of a woman who worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital and came home with little energy left for anything but survival. Then Richard entered their lives. At first, Ethan saw Richard as a stabilizer, someone who brought structure and comfort to a household that had often felt stretched thin. Richard, with his measured voice and polished presence, had swept Claire off her feet in less than a year. He was the kind of man who seemed to command attention without raising his voice, the kind who knew how to make every action deliberate, whether pouring a glass of wine or tying a tie. Yet, for Ethan, there had always been something complicated about Richard's attention. It wasn't paternal, not exactly. Richard complimented him in ways that lingered too long in the air, his tone holding weight Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "You've grown into such a striking young man," Richard would say after dinner, his eyes resting on Ethan longer than comfort allowed. Claire, busy clearing plates or adjusting her hair, never seemed to notice. Ethan told himself not to overthink it. He was 19, at the awkward threshold of adulthood, with college classes pulling him into new worlds. Maybe he was imagining it all. Still, a subtle unease brewed in him whenever Richard found reasons to sit too close on the couch or brush past him in the narrow kitchen doorway. Claire adored her husband. Ethan knew it from the way her face softened when Richard entered the room. For her, Richard was a gift after years of loneliness. She was grateful, and Ethan couldn't bring himself to tarnish that gratitude with his suspicions. He swallowed the unease, smiled when Richard complimented him, and convinced himself it was better not to think about it, but the moments piled up. Small ones, easy to dismiss on their own. Richard offering him a ride home from campus even when Ethan had said he could take the bus. Richard standing just a bit too close when teaching him how to grill steaks in the backyard. Richard's hand clapping his shoulder and then lingering, pressing just a fraction longer than casual. Ethan learned to laugh nervously and shift away, but he never said a word. One night in late summer, the heat heavy enough to make the air inside the house restless, Ethan left his bedroom in search of water. The clock glowed past midnight, and he assumed his mother had gone to bed hours ago. As he stepped quietly down the hall, voices drifted from the living room. His mother's, weary but calm. Richard's, low and deliberate. At first, Ethan meant to turn back, but the sound of his own name rooted him in place. "Ethan doesn't realize how extraordinary he is," Richard's voice carried with a slow intensity. "He has no idea how magnetic he's become." Claire chuckled softly, the sound puzzled. "He's still a boy in many ways. You're flattering him too much." There was a pause, and then Richard's tone shifted, darker, almost confessional. "No, Claire. You don't see him the way I do. You're his mother, you can't. But I notice everything. His posture, his confidence, the way he carries himself now. He's not just some kid anymore. He's different. And I can't pretend I don't feel it." Ethan froze, the glass of water forgotten. His pulse pounded so hard he feared it might echo down the hall. Claire's voice came after a long silence, tinged with disbelief. "Richard, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Richard exhaled, words thick with something dangerous, "that I desire him. That when I look at him, I see more than what I should. And I don't know how to bury it anymore." Ethan's throat constricted, panic rising. His mind screamed to leave, to run back to his room, but his legs refused to obey. He stood in the dim hallway, every nerve lit with horror. Claire's voice broke through, sharp but hushed, as though afraid the walls might be listening. "Stop it. Do you even realize what you're admitting? He's my son. He trusts you." "I know," Richard replied, his voice maddeningly steady. "And that's why I've said nothing until now. But I can't deny it to myself anymore. Every day, it gets harder to look at him and act like it's nothing." Ethan's hands trembled. He pressed himself against the wall, as though the plaster might swallow him whole. The weight of the confession suffocated him, leaving him dizzy with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a flicker of something he hated himself for, curiosity. Claire let out a brittle laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You've had too much to drink. You don't mean this." Richard didn't argue. He let the silence settle, thick and undeniable. Ethan couldn't hear the rest. He retreated down the hall on trembling legs, slipped back into his room, and closed the door as quietly as possible. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring into the dark, every breath shallow and sharp, the words replayed in his mind like a recording he couldn't turn off. "I desire him." Sleep never came. He lay awake until dawn, the morning light creeping over his walls as if to mock his inability to escape the truth. Richard's secret was out, and Ethan carried it now like a weight pressing into his chest. For the first time, he understood that his life at home had shifted into something unsteady, something dangerous. And though he didn't yet know what he would do, he knew one thing with certainty: nothing would ever be the same again.
The morning after that night, I woke with a restless ache in my chest. The memory of his hand brushing against mine, the intensity in his eyes, refused to fade. I tried to tell myself it had been a moment born of vulnerability, not desire. Yet even as I brewed my coffee, my thoughts drifted to Darius Collins, his quiet sighs, the weight of grief in his posture, the flicker of something unspoken between us. When I stepped outside later, I noticed him on the porch again, staring blankly at nothing in particular. The first words that came to my lips felt heavy. "Morning, Darius." He turned slowly, eyes meeting mine with an unreadable expression. For a long moment, we simply regarded each other, the air between us taut with what neither wanted to name aloud. Finally, he offered a faint smile. "Morning, Ethan." I brought my mug closer, leaning against the railing. "How did you sleep?" I asked cautiously. "Fitfully," he admitted, voice low. "Too many thoughts. Too much quiet." We lapsed into silence, both of us acutely aware that the previous night's tension had not dissipated. I wondered if he felt the same pull, the same conflicted stirrings I had. His grief was still raw, but intertwined with something else, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel until we had crossed that invisible boundary together. Days passed in this delicate dance. We shared moments of closeness, lingering touches disguised as accidental brushes, quiet conversations that stretched into the night. Each encounter deepened the intimacy, yet both of us hesitated to name it. Grief and desire entwined in a complicated knot, leaving us suspended between morality and longing. One evening, Darius spoke first, his voice uncharacteristically raw. "Ethan, I need to tell you something," he said, shifting on the porch swing. "I've been married a long time, and I love Monica. I still do in my own way. But I feel like I've been holding myself back from living, from feeling anything else. You made me realize that." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "You don't have to explain yourself," I said softly. "I understand more than you think." He shook his head, eyes glistening. "No, I want to. I've been so lonely, Ethan. So very lonely. And when you're here, it feels like something I can't describe. I'm scared that it's wrong, but I can't stop feeling it." The honesty of his confession brought a lump to my throat. I wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, but I hesitated, fearing that any movement might shatter the fragile equilibrium. Instead, I said, "Feeling something isn't wrong, Darius. Grief doesn't make you a prisoner of the past." He exhaled, leaning back as if releasing a weight he had carried for too long. "I don't want to hurt her memory, Ethan, but I also don't want to be alone." I realized then that we were bound not only by loss, but by the human need for connection, for intimacy. The risk of guilt or judgment was real, yet the pull was stronger than either of us could resist. A week later, the unspoken became undeniable. I arrived at his door to find him waiting, a hesitant smile on his face. "Do you want to sit?" he asked, gesturing to the porch. "Always," I replied, and we settled into our usual positions. The conversation meandered, touching on memories, regrets, small confessions, until the familiar tension returned, thicker this time. His hand brushed mine, lingering longer than usual. My pulse quickened, and I felt the surge of desire I had tried to suppress. He looked at me, searching my face, and I knew he felt it too. Without a word, he leaned closer. Our foreheads touched, breaths mingling. The world shrank until it was just the two of us, two souls precariously balanced on the edge of something forbidden yet inevitable. I don't know if this is right, he whispered. Maybe it doesn't have to be, I murmured, though my voice trembled. That night, we crossed the line fully, a collision of need and tenderness. Nothing about it was planned, yet it felt unavoidable, as if grief had drawn us together to fill a void neither of us could ignore. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, the room felt charged, silent but alive. In the days that followed, we navigated the new reality of our relationship. Secret smiles in the hallway, stolen glances, the brush of hands as if by accident. Each gesture a reminder of the intimacy that had formed, delicate and fragile. We talked openly about guilt and desire, about what we were doing and what it meant. Grief was still present, but it no longer dominated every moment. Instead, it coexisted with something raw and unspoken, a connection that neither could name but both recognized. One evening, as we sat side by side on the porch, the wind stirring the leaves around us, Darius turned toward me. Ethan, do you ever wonder if we're doing the wrong thing? Every day, I admitted. But I also know that we're here, and we can't ignore what's between us. He nodded slowly, his hand brushing against mine in a quiet acknowledgement. I don't want to lose this, he said. You won't, I promised, though uncertainty lingered beneath my words. We'll figure it out, together. The tension of our secret was palpable, a mixture of guilt, desire, and the lingering shadow of Monica's memory. But for the first time in weeks, the weight of grief had softened, replaced by the tentative warmth of companionship. We existed in that balance, careful, cautious, yet drawn irresistibly to each other, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. I realized that nothing would ever be the same. Our bond had shifted, fragile yet undeniable, leaving both of us suspended in a liminal space between mourning and desire, between morality and something wholly our own. And though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing with clarity. This connection, born of sorrow and tempered by longing, was only the beginning of something neither of us could have predicted. It wasn't resolution, not yet, but it was enough to keep me coming back, to keep both of us holding on, wondering what might happen next. The night settled around us, the quiet now a companion rather than a weight. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, thrilling hope that what we shared might endure beyond grief, beyond fear, beyond everything that had kept us apart for so long.
The days following the movie night carried a tension so thick that Ethan felt it with every breath. He avoided Richard when he could, retreating into his room or lingering on campus longer than necessary. Yet avoidance only amplified the pull. Each absence seemed to sharpen the awareness that something unfinished hovered between them, waiting to ignite. Richard, for his part, did not press. He moved with practiced ease, offering polite conversation when Claire was present, never once betraying the storm Ethan knew simmered beneath the surface. But when they were alone, silence spoke volumes. Richard's glances lingered. His pauses stretched. And Ethan, no matter how desperately he wished to deny it, found himself watching, waiting, wanting. One evening, a thunderstorm swept through the city. Claire had taken another overnight shift, leaving Ethan and Richard alone with the rain hammering against the windows. The power flickered, then failed, plunging the house into darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. Ethan sat on the couch with a book in his lap, though he hadn't read a single line. His nerves hummed with the storm inside and outside. Richard entered the room with a flashlight, his expression calm, his voice low. "Looks like it's just us tonight." The word struck Ethan like a chord, vibrating with meaning far beyond their surface. He nodded, pretending to focus on his book, though his hands trembled. Richard sat across from him, the beam of the flashlight casting shadows that danced across his face. For long minutes, neither spoke. The storm roared, rattling the windows, filling the silence with its own restless rhythm. Then, without warning, Richard rose and crossed the room. He stopped only a step away, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint trace of cologne mixed with rain. "Ethan," Richard said softly, his voice carrying the weight of weeks unspoken. "I can't keep pretending this isn't there. And I don't think you can, either." Ethan's chest constricted. His instinct screamed to deny it, to retreat, yet his body betrayed him. His breath caught, his pulse quickened, his eyes, traitorous, met Richard's. Ethan began, but the word dissolved on his tongue. Richard's hand lifted, slow and deliberate, giving Ethan the chance to pull away. When his fingers finally brushed Ethan's cheek, the touch was feather-light, reverent. "Tell me to stop, and I will," Richard whispered. The storm cracked above them, lightning flooding the room for a split second. In that flash, Ethan saw the hunger in Richard's gaze, the desperate restraint, the dangerous sincerity. And something inside him broke that he didn't tell him to stop. The first kiss was hesitant, trembling with forbidden urgency. Ethan's breath shuddered as Richard pressed closer, the years of secrecy unraveling in that moment. The kiss deepened, and with it came the collapse of every wall Ethan had built. Guilt surged, but so did a desire so fierce it drowned every rational thought. By the time the storm began to fade, Ethan's world had already shifted irreversibly. The affair had begun, not in the abstract, not in glances and whispers, but in flesh, in touch, in the undeniable reality of choice. In the days that followed, life became a careful performance. Claire bustled through her routines, unaware of the secret unfolding within her home. Ethan and Richard learned to mask their glances, to bury their words beneath casual conversation. But behind closed doors, when Claire was at work or asleep, the facade cracked. Ethan felt torn in every moment. Richard's attention was intoxicating, his touch, his whispered affirmations, the way he made Ethan feel seen in ways no one else ever had. Yet the weight of betrayal pressed heavily on his conscience. Every time he looked at his mother, guilt coiled tighter around his chest. Still, he returned to Richard, again and again, drawn to the fire even as it scorched him. The secrecy heightened the intensity. A hand brushing under the table when Claire was only feet away. A hurried kiss in the garage before she returned home. Late-night whispers through Ethan's half-open door. Each moment risked discovery, and that risk only deepened the urgency, but the cracks began to show. Claire noticed Ethan's distracted silences, the way he avoided her gaze. She commented on his late nights, his sudden evasions, though she dismissed them as the growing pains of young adulthood. Ethan nodded, smiled, and lied, hating himself more with every deception. One evening, as Claire prepared for another shift, she paused in the doorway and looked at her son. "You've been different lately," she said softly, concern lining her features. "Is everything okay?" Ethan forced a smile, though his stomach churned. "I'm fine, Mom. Just stressed about school." She accepted the answer, but Ethan saw the doubt in her eyes. He watched her leave, her trust unshaken but fragile, and the guilt nearly consumed him. That night, when Richard found him in the hall, Ethan almost turned away. But Richard's hand caught his wrist, gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry this alone," Richard murmured. "What we have, it's real. Don't let shame convince you otherwise." Ethan wanted to believe him. He wanted to surrender to the warmth of those words, to the comfort of being wanted so completely. But the truth gnawed at him. What they had was built on betrayal, on secrecy that could not last. Still, when Richard pulled him into the shadows, Ethan didn't resist. He never did. The affair deepened, weaving itself into the fabric of their lives. Each encounter bound Ethan tighter to Richard, even as it pushed him further from his mother. He told himself it was temporary, that it would end, that he could stop before the truth surfaced. But each day made that promise harder to keep. The suspense of discovery hung over them like a blade. Every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected knock at the door sent Ethan's heart racing. The danger was constant, and yet neither of them slowed. It was one small moment, weeks later, that nearly shattered the illusion. Claire returned home early from a shift, stepping into the house just as Ethan slipped out of Richard's room. He froze in the hallway, his heart thundering, but Claire only smiled wearily, too exhausted to notice. The danger passed, but Ethan knew it had been too close. That night, lying in his bed, he stared at the ceiling, the weight of his choices pressing down with relentless force. He thought of his mother's tired smile, of Richard's whispered promises, of the storm that had marked the beginning of everything. He knew the secret could not stay buried forever, and though fear clawed at him, another truth terrified him even more: he wasn't sure he wanted it to.